Oh, I should probably turn my microphone. This is the Observations Podcast for Sunday, the 5th of November, 2023. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Dale Franks. Michael Wade is waiting in the wings, not here yet. Actually, he is here. I can hear him, and I'm going to presume that he can hear me. But he has not clicked the button that says Start Virtual Camera in OBS. So we are
I did that. I haven't done the one, I guess, on Zoom.
It might be. You might have the wrong camera on Zoom. We can hear you though. So there is that. You are making noise, even if we can't see you. So
I'm going to figure this out. We'll just keep going.
Okay. Some administrivia here, I guess, to start off. Let me switch over to my Zoom window. On your video, and you should be seeing the video button.
I'm already signed in, right?
Oh, yeah, you're signed in. You're here. We're hearing you. The thing is, you're just not broadcasting a camera. So on the Zoom window, on the corner of your stop video button, the upper right corner, pop up the menu that will say whatever your camera is. It should be OBS virtual camera. Be sure that is set as your camera in Zoom, and you should be broadcasting.
I should be, but what I'm not doing, I don't know what my fucking password is. Motherfucker.
Okay. Hold on. Language.
I can't find any of the Zoom settings.
They're in the Zoom window, the little display window, which should be showing me.
Well, it's prompting me to sign up. And I'm like, motherfucker, I've already signed up. Oh, excuse me. Language. Mother humper.
Yeah, so you don't have the buttons at the bottom of your Zoom screen when you mouse over them?
I don't have a Zoom screen, no.
Okay.
OBS took everything over.
That should not be true. You should have a Zoom screen that shows our video.
Well, we are in agreement.
So I don't know what you'll have to do, log into Zoom or what have you. For the moment, we'll have you on audio. Do you want to talk, or do you want to try to figure out stuff?
No. Go ahead. Let's just talk. I mean,
okay.
I understand that seeing me is a beautiful part of most people's day, but sometimes we gotta just deal.
All right. Well, we'll just deal. So we had a private conversation earlier this week, and I think you voiced something that certainly resonates in my house as well, which is that there's just a sense that things are slipping away so rapidly that it's not even easy to try to make plans for the future.
Well, that's right. Yeah.
And I kind of wanted to explore that, especially I think one of the things that has surprised me over the last month, ever since October 7th, is the depth of anti-Semitism that exists, not just in the Muslim community, where it is relatively unsurprising, but in the general progressive community, and how many what you thought were normal progressives have been so radicalized by what happened, and just the absolute refusal to even consider that Hamas might be a terrorist organization.
Yeah.
That they might have some legitimate complaint that can be resolved. And I don't know whether it is intentional obtuseness or stupidity or just outright evil that they will not recognize that the very charting founder of Hamas is the complete eradication of the Jewish state and the massive genocide or mass resettlement that would require. I mean, you want to talk, and they always refer to Israel as the genocidal state, right? And if Israel is a genocidal state, they're doing an awfully bad job of it when you simply look at the population statistics in Gaza and the West Bank, where the population has and continues to explode. So the Israelis aren't doing a very good job of genocide, but I guarantee you, based on what has happened in practically every other Arab state in the Middle East, that is at least one thing that the Arab governments are competent at, which is the ethnic cleansing of Jews in their countries.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I've just been shocked by the level of anti-Semitism that we're seeing and people going out in public. You know, this whole thing about people running around and pulling posters of some of the, like the kidnapped kids, right? 3, 5, 8-year-old Israeli kids that were, captured by Hamas and are being held by Hamas as hostages. And they're just going out and just ripping their posters down. And they feel perfectly justified in doing that. Indeed, there was some caught on video is a New York County public defender who was caught on video ripping down posters. I don't even comprehend the level of hatred that would make you do that. But it's clearly a level of hatred that exists. I mean, it's clearly something that's going on. I don't know how I know how to combat it. I just know that
you know how to combat it for real.
Yeah,
you don't know that how we can actually combat it without bringing high amounts of opprobrium upon our heads.
Yeah,
I mean, it's real simple. Kill the motherfuckers. I mean, this has been the number one way throughout all of human history to eliminate those who existentially threaten your existence. Which I guess that's redundant, but the point being that, I mean, there's only one way to go about that. You eradicate them. Period.
Yeah, look, I'm already on board with the idea that if you are out publicly protesting Hamas, which is, let me point out, a proscribed terrorist organization. If you're out supporting Hamas and you were an immigrant to the United States, then we should hunt you down, grab you, and deport you, and send you back to whatever your country of origin is.
Yeah, absolutely.
No ifs, ands, or buts. It used to be an unexceptional statement that the purpose of immigration was to allow people into our country that we believe will be a boon to the country. We have no obligation to allow anyone into this country, poems on statues notwithstanding, that we don't want here or who do not want to support the way of life that we have built in what I will generally call the West. If you hate our society so much, then we have no obligation to bring you here, and we certainly have no obligation to let you stay here, and I would argue we have an obligation to send you back to where you came from. If that is the society...
I would agree 100%.
If that is the society in which you want to live, then I feel that we have a responsibility of sending you back to that society. For whatever reason you wanted to come to the United States, whether it was economic reasons or what have you, and the first thing you do whenever you get here is begin agitating for the same kind of repression and hopelessness that you left. Okay, if that's what you want, I think we should be perfectly willing to give it to you in your own country. And it doesn't mean that we have to, torture or beat or, otherwise, harm these people. We just need to put them on a plane and send them home.
Well, then there's the other side of this too. Those who are openly advocating for Hamas, really against Israel. I mean, let's just be honest. Most people have no clue what Hamas stands for, what they do. Uh, there was actually, I can't remember who did it, went out into the streets, I think of like New York City, and tried to sign people up to support Hamas. He said, okay, well, here's the terms and conditions. And he would say, before you sign, here are the terms and conditions. And he basically read off the uh, Hamas political platform, which is we need to kill every Jew, non-Muslim, Christian in the Holy Land and eventually around the world. Oh, I don't know if I support that. Really? Gays need to be jailed and or killed. Oh, I don't know about that. Yeah, you have no idea what the hell you're supporting. These people operate off of a really misguided Marxist-Leninist worldview that says he who has the power is the oppressor, and there's literally no deviation from that. That's just how it works. It's it's set in stone. It's never going to change. So because Israel is more powerful in terms of certainly economic power and political power. Well, I don't know if they are more powerful in political power, but they are perceived to be more powerful. They are deemed the oppressors. So, of course, it's the Palestinians we need to support. They're in an open air prison. What? The Israelis haven't been there since 2005. They've elected their own leaders once.
Yeah, once.
I mean,
the average number of elections that occur in Arab countries. Once.
Right. I mean, this is your own problem that you've created. And when I'm speaking to Hamas, and when the Palestinians in general, first of all, you're not even a real country. There has never been a Palestinian country. There has been a Palestinian area. There has been a Palestine protectorate. There has been a Palestine British mandate from the UN. There has never been a country called Palestine. These people have no common history except with other Arabs and Muslims. And they get kicked out of all the Muslim nations because the PLO and the Palestinians are hardcore revolutionary Marxists. And so when they didn't like what Jordan was doing, they attacked everybody and assassinated the prime minister. Meanwhile, hijacking planes and flying them to Jordan and then blowing them up, taking hostages. Did the same thing in Iraq, did the same thing in Kuwait. They did the same thing in Egypt. So that none of the Arab places want these people. And even better for these Arab places is they're a really good tip of the spear. They act as an aid provocateur within Israeli lands. And it doesn't matter what Israel does, as long as the Palestinians are there and doing their thing, you get against Israel.
But it's important to note that the other Arab countries despise the Palestinians.
Oh, yeah.
And they refuse to help them, and they certainly refuse to allow them into their countries as refugees or immigrants or what have you.
They've been kicked out of all the best countries.
Yeah, and if you go to another country, they will segregate you in a quote unquote refugee camp and will intern you there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Most of these refugee camps that we talk about, they weren't run by Israel.
No,
they were largely run. Well, the Gaza Strip, which is the key focus now. The Gaza Strip is Egyptian territory.
Yes, that's right.
It always has.
That was
been.
Abandoned to the Palestinians in order to keep and then they're not allowed. They
Yeah,
have
and
a
by the way,
huge
by the
border.
way, not just abandoned to the Palestinians, but abandoned and the border to Egypt sealed off.
That's right, the Al Rafah Gate. It is a matter of fact, they're building a new one right now,
Yeah,
even more fortified.
yeah. The Gaza Strip was at least Egyptian territory.
That's right. And look, I've walked across the border from Israel into Egypt, and it's like an outpost. Into the Sinai, it's an outpost because few people will even bother to do it. You can actually get a detachable stamp there, so it doesn't show up in your passport. But once you're in Egypt, you have to check into a police station within, I think, like 3 days, 5 days, and then they say, "Oh, I know where you came in. I know how you got here."
But try to make that border crossing from Gaza.
Oh, you can't do it. As a matter of fact, there's a good reason that that is probably one of the most well guarded borders in the world. All the agitators need to stay on one side and one side only.
Yeah, because the Egyptians do not want them in Egypt any more than the Jordanians want them in Jordan, or the Lebanese, to the extent there is a Lebanese government at all, wants them in Lebanon. And the Syrians certainly don't want them. And
Oh wait, are we getting?
hey, how about that? Nope, you just turned yourself back off.
Let's get it with the green screen.
You were live. There you go. Now you're live again. How about that?
All right, we'll just do it with the green screen. Screw it.
Oh, your background isn't working.
I don't. Well, the OBS, I can only do one or the other. I don't know why. Zoom is fucking with me.
Okay, well, at least you're on now, so we got that fixed. So we're both here now.
Well, here, maybe I can do. I have no idea if I can do it.
By the way, right out of the bat in chat, Michael's burner account is about to be added to some very interesting mailing lists. Yeah, even in the future, nothing works. Another comment. Largely, this is a skill difference. You realize, right? There you go. Look at that. The Golden Gate Bridge in the background.
Oh, you know what? Even better.
Okay. Oh, hey.
This is more how I'm feeling.
Mr. Spaceman.
All right. On the edge of the world, on the edge of copious topics du jour.
Here's one of two things is going to happen. First of all, it's becoming clear that the Israeli stuff, there's not much that we can affect as American citizens. But for us as American citizens, there are certain concerns that the government is simply not addressing. And those concerns have been highlighted by all of these pro-Hamas protests. I mean, and they haven't been as bad here as they've been in places like England, where people have just been, shouting horrific.
Yeah, they've been crazy over there.
If we cannot secure the borders, then it's going to become equally bad here. And
it's already not good here.
No, it's already not good here. And the funny thing is, and this is the thing that gets me, both conservatives and Republicans talk about securing the borders. Even the Biden administration only talks in terms of how the border needs to be secure and how we need to ensure that, we don't have foreign threats coming in through an unsecured border. They don't do anything about it, but at least they talk about it. I mean, people have to, sooner or later, begin to realize that this is all just talk. And
I think people woke up, at least Republican voters woke up to that a good 20 years ago. That was sort of the beginning of the rhino thing. But I still have friends on the right who lament, when did we all become rhinos and rhino this and rhino that? Why is that? We're supposed to just be Republicans. Well, because it's not about a team; it's about ideals. And if you don't hold a certain ideology, and ideology gets such a bad name, I maybe philosophy is a better term. I don't know. To me, they're sort of interchangeable. But if you don't hold certain principles as valuable and live up to those principles and support those principles and retard attacks against those principles, well, then you're not actually supporting those principles. And if you want to tie your party name to those principles, then you can't complain when you don't follow these precepts, act a different way, support different things, and then get called a fake because that's what you are. I mean, you're fake. You pretend to support things that you don't support.
Well, that gets us into a interesting area just of historical development, which is if you go back to the 1960s, early 1970s, the Democratic and Republican Party had some broad ideological fault lines between them. Yet at the same time, there was a wide diversity of belief in both parties. I can remember, 1972, and the talk about the Nelson Rockefeller wing of the Republican Party, the liberal Republicans and the conservative Democrats. And the parties were not as explicitly ideological at the time like they are now. And so,
that's true. That's absolutely true.
Yeah, the new Rhino.
But also their goals were also much more in line with each other at the time. I remember, back in the 50s, even the 60s, there were plenty of Democrats who were very anti-communist. JFK, Bobby Kennedy, matter of fact, the whole Kennedy clan. Maybe not Teddy, I don't really know, but that was not an uncommon belief to hold, and yet that went by the wayside fairly quickly in about 10 years.
Yeah, so the term rhino, which gets thrown around a lot, you shouldn't be surprised because now we have explicitly ideological parties. We have a progressive party and we have a conservative party. I would argue that the Republican Party, and by the way, just so everybody knows, I'm not a member of either party. I am an independent.
Right.
As
am I.
So this is not a partisan thing, but I think I would argue that the Republican Party, in terms of viewpoint, is probably a bigger tent than the Democratic Party. I think
right now it is. I think I think that's right.
I think the Democratic Party has just jumped full into the progressive or woke or whatever you want to call it ideology. And there's very little backing away from it. Now, look, there are certain people in the Democratic Party, Bernie Sanders, surprisingly, one of them, who just are not going to buy into this standard progressive oppressed oppressor paradigm that seems to rule everything.
He's an old school red shirt.
Yeah, he's an old school red shirt. So his paradigm is still locked into the old style class distinctions.
Exactly.
But that's not
don't you distract him from that. I've got enough on my plate, people.
Yeah, but that's not the paradigm that we deal with now with progressivism. We've surpassed the class, and probably because while it worked reasonably well in Europe in terms of class distinction, it doesn't work very well in America because we are not a class-based society the way that the Europeans
or class conscience. Everybody thinks they're in the middle class in America.
Yeah, and everybody thinks that they can make it
truly in the upper class.
Yeah, and everybody thinks that they can make it if they're lucky and work hard enough into the upper class. America has
one of the few places that actually can happen.
Yes, because America has or has had in the past a level of social mobility undreamed of by any state in Western Europe, because they're sort of held down by their history of aristocracy and the whole class-based idea. So class-based Marxism never worked well in America. Now they have found a formulation that seems to work. the oppressed
Yeah,
oppressor
they traded out class for
oppressors.
race.
Well,
Right.
not even
So
but even race is
being gay, being anything other than a white male,
yes.
heterosexual white male.
Yeah, and I think that works much better, and clearly it has worked much better in an American context because now
It has. There are terms that Americans understand. Yeah.
we can join the oppression Olympics now.
Right.
And so you mentioned race, which is but that's just one thing that gets you into the oppression Olympics, right?
Yeah.
It could be that you're homosexual or bisexual or whatever, or transgender, whatever it is. We can now lump a bunch of largely disparate groups into a single class of oppressed, and everybody knows who the oppressors are, and that is a paradigm that seems to work, and that's the playbook that the left is playing off of. And so Israel, for some reason, is now in the oppressor category.
So hold on.
The
Not somehow,
Palestinians are
it has
in the
always
oppressed.
been in that category. It's just that now that real fissure in this collective oppressed class that the left has been trying to amalgamate, that throws the big giant crash into the whole thing, because all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, we don't support Israel? Why wouldn't we support Israel? I'm Jewish. I only want to help the world. Why do we stand with the Palestinians? Well, didn't they go and rape and murder like a bunch of concert goers and cut the heads off babies? Well, we don't really know that they did that. And either way, they're suffering
or even
under oppression.
Even worse is history didn't begin on October 7th.
Oh, that fucking moron.
Yeah,
you're goddamn right it didn't. But if you can explain to me history before that, please go ahead and do so. Let's go back to 1948. Better let's go back to 1922 when the Balfour Declaration happened. Then let's start talking about how history has panned out. Let's talk about the several wars that have been launched against Israel by its neighbors, including on the day it was founded. I mean, yeah, absolutely. Let's go back and talk about that history. None of it is going to put Hamas in a good light unless you're a Marxist, Leninist, socialist who enjoys this sort of revolutionary activity. Sticking it to the man.
But it brings up the
Assholes.
question of how do we fight that in this country?
Well, I'd still say it's the same answer, but I don't think we can get away with that.
Yeah, here's the problem. We're beginning, in my view, the West in general, but certainly the United States, is beginning to look very much like Weimar Germany.
You're not alone in that estimation.
Because we have a class of people born, raised, and educated here who now, do not believe in our form of government. Mm-hmm. They don't even believe in the principles behind our form of government. In fact, they believe that our government is based on evil principles overall. Mm-hmm. That we have always been a problematic project, and that America needs to be fundamentally changed. That sounds a lot like somebody we may be familiar with from the 1920s to the 1930s in Germany.
And somebody from 2008 to 2016.
2016 here in the White House. We are also living through a time in which it does not appear that the police can keep us safe. It doesn't appear that the government will keep us safe. The government is not even concerned about the border. And this takes us in a roundabout way to something we talked about in 2016, and that I think is even more relevant right now, today. Donald Trump is a symptom of a broken political system that people
Yes.
are looking for
Yes.
a way to change. And
I'm
Donald
nodding vigorously.
and Donald Trump is just the very first stage in that reaction. And
Absolutely right.
if you think Donald Trump was bad, then
Where do you see
continue.
the next iteration?
Yeah, continue, Republicans and Democrats, continue to run the country as you have been doing it.
Yep.
And there will be an even greater reaction. Trump, as bad as you may think he is, he's just a narcissistic buffoon. The guy that comes after him will probably be a lot smarter and a lot more ruthless in terms
He was
of
a battering
accomplishing
ram
his goals.
to send through the ramparts because he didn't care. He didn't care about getting hurt. He didn't care about the malign that he would suffer. He didn't care. And that made him the perfect vessel to go into the China shop and start breaking shit.
But
And he did it to a certain degree.
But unfortunately, he was also limited.
He's also his own worst enemy.
Yeah, he was limited by his own personality. He was, as we've said many times, an imperfect messenger for that message.
Yeah, exactly. But he was I think a fairly pungent, cogent shot across the bow of what you could have if you don't start waking up and Washington doesn't start paying attention to what Americans actually want.
Yeah, interesting historical reference from chat. Inebriated Plutarch says you could present a slightly modified version of the Nazi 25 points from the early 1930s to the Dems, and most of them would go for it.
Yep, I've actually seen people do that before. I'm sure the commenter has seen that as well.
And I see progressivism as totalitarian in scope.
Yeah.
And every bit as ideologically committed and as destructive to American ideals as Nazism. It
Absolutely.
really
there is no form of collectivism that can comport with American ideals. It's not possible. As a matter of fact, what's interesting about all this, the whole shebang, how Israel and our, individual feelings and thoughts about Israel, its right to exist and all that stuff. That's the birthplace of the very freedoms we enjoy. The ones that we specifically selected to be paramount, that they exist before anything else, and that a government is only formed to secure those rights, not to create them, not to give privilege to them. We have these rights to begin with because we are naturally individuals, born in the eyes of God or your creator or whatever it is you want, or no creator. But you have the innate human ability to protect your life, to pursue your happiness, as long as you don't hurt somebody else in that pursuit, and everything that flows from that. Say what you want, think what you want. You should be able to do those things.
The core of the American founding
this is the crucible where that started.
The core of American founding is individual liberty.
Mm-hmm.
Individuals. Any collectivist ideology, and I don't care whether it's communism or Nazism or progressivism, or white supremacy, which is another collectivist belief.
Any collectivist
belief is fundamentally hostile to American principles. It is fundamentally un-American.
Right. Yes, that's exactly right. And where that idea was first formed was in the crucible of the Middle East in Israel. It spread through Christianity throughout most of Europe and the rest of the world. But it truly baked and boiled and went through its trials and tribulations in Europe, and that's where we get this Western civilization from. And through all those trials and tribulations over hundreds and hundreds of years, we finally boiled it down to this idea that the individual was the ultimate political entity, and that's where politics should start, at the individual. Collectivists have gone the other way and said, no, 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 no. It's all about the social contract, and we have to work for each other for the common good and whatever else. I mean, it sounds good. There's nothing. I mean, when Rousseau wrote about this stuff, it didn't sound oppressive or anything. There was some sense there. There was an appeal to common humanity. Absolutely, and I think that that still exists with us. But if you're talking about a governing form, well, this is always the problem: is who decides, right? And that's where the individualists come out ahead. Is that when we let free people make free decisions, we get a lot more benefit out of that than when we try to control everything from some sort of top-down system. And
Ultimately,
we've known this now for
yeah,
hundreds of years.
ultimately, any collectivist system, when put in power as some sort of governing paradigm,
Must become tyrannical.
it has to, because there is always an oppressor group. Now, it may be the upper class, the aristocracy in the European terms, or it may be white heterosexual men in the modern progressive terms. But there is always a class that must be legislated against.
It could be Sunnis in Iraq. It could be Hutsis in Yemen. I mean, it doesn't matter. The if the basis of your political governance is going to be collectivism, there's always a group you can single out as the oppressors and several other groups that are the oppressed. I mean, and you can't resolve that except through tyranny. There's just no way to do that.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that the playbook is always the same. And you can look at the Soviet Union, you can look at Nazi Germany, you can look at modern progressivism. And there is always some out group that has to be legislated against, that has to have their supposed privileges removed, and other groups that now have to be put in a leadership position.
And get extra privilege.
And, it reminds me of the old Who song, Meet the New Boss, same as the old boss.
Right. I think Radley Balko put that up as he did that. Remember a long time ago, back when blogging was still a thing, and Radley Balko did a great, like a list of like 100 songs that were libertarian themed. And that was like among the top was Won't Get Fooled Again.
Yeah. So I wonder now if at some point the American people, or at least a large percentage of the American people, around half, and I think that's probably the right number, around half, will at some point just say no more. We are done. We are not doing it this way. And I don't know what that looks like. But what I do know is people, if they have the power to do so, and they find that the government is not doing what they want, they will supply what they want themselves. And that almost always ends up
especially those
in an ugly
who aren't
place.
Aren't terribly dependent on the government to begin with. So I think of like ranchers and, people out in flyover country and, who they already know all the suppliers of everything they need. They already know like where all that stuff comes from. Matter of fact, they could run it themselves if they wanted to, but they've got better things to do. This is something that people who grew up in cities and inner suburbs really, really miss is that government is really not that helpful to most people. Um, it may seem helpful to you because it keeps, traffic down or people moving from place to place with buses and shuttles and whatever else. That it keeps the streets safe. Most of the least continent, not necessarily people, uh, they don't experience this stuff. Matter of fact, it's their cousin Earl who comes and plows the road when it actually gets wintry enough. I mean, they already know who all these people are.
Or they just have a snow plow that they can stick on the front of their own
because they're self-sufficient. Because
Ram 2500.
I'm going to wait 3 days for the county to come out and do it. No, screw that.
I got to get to the roads now. So,
and people don't recognize that when they live in cities where they and I understand that. I mean, look, you live in a city, you've got a lot of people. You do need some rules in place. And I understand that. So you're going to be a little bit more rules based, but that doesn't work. It doesn't translate to every place. You can't run every place in like you can't even run New York City like they run New York City.
Well, here's the weird thing, and even you can't even run Los Angeles like New York City, a city with a similar population, simply because of geography. But if you grew up in New York City, you've grown up in a place where you never needed to have a car, because after all, there is a system of public transportation that will whisk you magically all the way across the city.
You didn't sign up for trash pickup. You didn't choose a trash company. You don't know where the hell your gas or water or sewer comes from or goes to.
Yeah, all of this stuff.
It's all taken care of for you.
Yeah, it's all taken care of for you. It's just all part of the basic infrastructure you need to live in a city. And in that environment, it makes government, although in most cases, remember, you're referring to city government there, not the federal government. City government.
That's exactly right. Yes.
And in most cases, that is all taken care of for you, and indeed has to be, simply because you can't really have a city of that size without that level of infrastructure, unless you want to wade through, 3 feet, a 3-foot puddle of human waste in the streets every time you want to go somewhere. So all of that stuff has to be taken care of. But if you live outside a city, heck, if you live in a suburb, none of that gets taken care of for you. Indeed, if you live in Los Angeles, forget about public transportation. There's not enough of it to even be honored with the name of public transportation.
Is there a metro system in LA? I mean, San Francisco has BART.
Yeah, technically, yes. Technically, there is a metro system.
But it only goes to like a few places.
In LA. Technically,
because LA is way spread out.
Yeah, that's the problem. It's not only just way spread out. I mean, it is spread out across hundreds of square miles. It's not like New York City, which is basically encapsulated within about a 25 square mile area. Maybe not
it's
even
on an island.
Maybe not even 25 square miles.
Literally on an island.
Well, part of it is, part of it's onshore, but still, it's a geographically tiny area. I mean, it's like 10 or 15 square miles. It's comparable to Washington, D.C. in size, although obviously far more densely populated. Yes. So a public transportation system, for example, there can work, right? The distances are very short. And
it barely works in San Francisco.
And geography doesn't matter. In Los Angeles, on the other hand, you have a basin that is next to the ocean. Then you have a series of mountains that cut right between it. You also have mountains that go east to west as well as north to south. It is spread out across hundreds of square miles.
And those strippers got to live somewhere.
Yeah, but the population density is so much lower and the population is so spread out, it's almost impossible to build a public transportation system in Los Angeles. Yeah. The distances are too daunting. So
I mean, even San Diego only has that
the tram,
that train.
Yeah, it's the
and
tram.
It like goes almost nowhere.
Well, there is in San Diego. You have the coaster, which will take you from Oceanside all the way down to downtown San Diego.
I have never taken it anywhere.
I actually used to work in La Jolla, and I used to actually pay the $115 a month for unlimited coaster. And so I would just go to Oceanside, catch the train,
To
and
go,
catch the train
yeah,
to La
I was
Jolla.
going to say, because you were coming from up north.
Yeah, so I was coming from Oceanside, so I just go to Oceanside to La Jolla. It was a 30, 35-minute train
Yeah,
ride.
you're downtown. There's no train that takes you up to the lamp district. There's no train that
There
takes you
is,
over to the
there are,
Italian.
there is the tram system, the red trolleys. And the red
But it
trolleys,
only takes you to one stop. Well, I think there's like 4 stops on the one that goes north south, and it only takes you to like a few places.
yeah,
You're not you can get to the south part of what is it, Little Italy, and you can get right in the middle of Gaslamp District, or Gaslight District. No,
it's
Gaslamp
Gaslamp,
District. But I mean, even there, I mean, San Diego's a fairly major city, and its public transportation is
yeah. But again,
almost nothing.
it's the tyranny of distance out west that you just don't
True.
face back east. Although there are plenty of progressives out west living on
But
the
hey, you're going
coast.
to be
It seems to attract
able to
them.
get to Bakersfield in like an hour and 15 minutes pretty soon.
Yeah, you'll have your. Well, actually, no, you can't get to Bakersfield, but you can get from Bakersfield to Fresno. So, great. Now you're marooned in Fresno.
It's
Cool.
Yes,
that's going to be our
Get your seat early.
It's going to be our $135 billion train, which is currently a train to nowhere.
Just remember that visiting days are Thursdays at San Clemente.
Right. But even at that, if you live in a city, much of your life is taken care of you. I mean, look, Los Angeles doesn't have much of a public transportation system, but they do at least have streets, and they do have highways, and they do have ways of getting around. And trust me, I know that because I used to have to drive them every single day, all the way across from Rancho Cucamonga,
And
where I
they've got
live,
lots
to
of
downtown LA.
infrastructure. They've got tolled lanes. They've got untolled lanes. They maintain an airport, which actually is not a bad airport.
Yeah. But now let's
they've got. Go ahead.
Yeah, but let's remove ourselves from those cities, and let us stick ourselves in Indio, California, or someplace in the middle of Kansas, or Colorado, or practically anywhere from the Mississippi to the Sierra Nevadas, and all of that goes away. You have to be largely self-sufficient, or more self-sufficient than anyone who lives anywhere in a city. And the interesting thing is that I find, and I don't know if I can draw a straight line between it, but I find it very interesting that as America has become more urbanized, this sort of collective ideology has become more and more prevalent in society. And certainly for people on the left, it has kind of driven out this idea of individual accountability, individual freedom, and individual responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it, like our grandparents would have scoffed at the idea of somebody changing their oil in their car. Like, what? You just have an oil pan, you open up the plug, and you let it pour out, and you pour more in. Not that hard. Yeah. I don't need to pay somebody $2.50 an hour
for something I can do in 15 minutes. But if you've grown up in New York City and you've never owned a car, the idea of an oil change is completely.
It's a whole different thing. Wait, you have to change the oil?
Wait, it's not. Well, also, if you live in the country, you have a much better idea where your food comes from. If you live in the city, you don't.
Absolutely.
There is this divorce between the things that make me actually be able to live a daily life and how they're supplied to me. Right. Just happens largely by magic. Even more so now that you have Instacart. If you have Instacart or whatever, you don't even have to go to a grocery store. You just open up your phone, say, I want this, and someone just leaves it at your front door an hour later. I mean, it's really great and it's really convenient, but it's not real life. And I
It's
think,
like that. What was that? Do you remember that? That video? They were Australian, and the guy is like, he reports his wife missing, or his girlfriend or whatever, and he's like, I don't know, but it might have something to do with this table. And the two, a man and a woman cop, are standing there, and I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, I don't know, but this table, it's like magic or something. I just, plates, dishes, old, you know, chips bags, whatever, it just disappears in the morning and everything's fine. And maybe she sat on it. And the woman cop's like, are you serious? He's like, yeah, really. I mean, I don't know. Look, I've really been pushing it for the last couple of months. I've been leaving out pizza boxes, like day old food. I've been putting laundry on here, and like it all just goes away. My laundry ends up neatly folded in a basket in my room. And I don't know, it's just like a magic table. So maybe she sat on it. And the lady cop's like, are you fucking kidding me? And the guy cop's like, no, I have the same table at home.
yeah, well, living in a city is much like having a
Once you
magic
get
table.
used, exactly. Once you get used to those things just happening, you don't think about it. You don't have to do anything about it. Well, yeah, then it's like magic.
And
It
I
just happens.
and I wonder if this kind of divorce from reality is what makes people that live in cities sort of naturally inclined towards government as the answer. Because as far as they can see, things work fine. It's all because of government. If we just have more government, they could fix all sorts of other things. Notwithstanding,
Except, have you ever heard anybody from the city? Do they ever say, "Oh my God, it's awesome! All these things are taken care of for me"? No, they're constantly complaining about how not enough's done, how they're doing it wrong, how they don't get enough of this and they get too much of that.
trash
It's like,
collection,
well,
just
there you go.
yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's very strange why so many people that live in cities just fall for this progressivism. And maybe it's because so many of the people who live in cities, especially over the last 40 years, have now gone through the indoctrination ringer of public schools and universities.
Yeah,
And of course, if you go to university, you're not going to go back to, fly over Kansas and go back to work on the farm. No, no, no. You're going to head to a city because,
some will.
unless you specifically got a degree in animal husbandry or veterinary medicine with the intention of going back, your degree
Which
in
case you would have gone to UT
yeah, Texas
Aggies.
A&M. Um, if you end up at Northwestern, you're probably going to stay in Chicago or maybe move to New York because your finance degree is just not going to be all of that useful in Omaha, Nebraska.
Yeah, Peoria, Illinois is kind of out for you. Let you ever your heart set on being a mid-level government pencil pusher.
And of course, schools are now just a breeding ground for this same type of progressive ideology.
Well, yeah, but that was progressive. I mean, that's been the plan always. It's been the plan
The long march
for
through the
literally 200 and
institutions.
some years. Yeah. I mean, um, I know I love bringing him up because I just find him fascinating. But Robert Owens, the coal magnate from England who came over to the United States in, I guess, the early 1800s, um, set up this utopian uh, place in, I think it was Illinois or Indiana, maybe Ohio. I don't remember. But and that's what it was. I mean, it was a Marxist utopian. Well, it wasn't Marxist because Marx had not come about yet, but it was a communist utopian socialist um, sort of get together where parents were separated from their children. Um, Everybody would go to class, and then everybody would have to work for a certain amount of the day. And this was utopia. I mean, it sounds a little bit like a kibbutz because guess what? Kibutzes are kind of similar. Um, and it didn't work out. Obviously, he tried a couple of times, and every time failed because eventually it was just like, well, I'm a parent. I really want to see my kids. I'm a kid. I really want to see my parents. And it was impossible. It turned out to break those natural bonds in order to form a new socialist man. Well, this has been what education has been running up against for literally centuries, is that they try really hard to turn children away from their parents' instructions if those instructions are not in line with the progressive worldview.
Yeah, and by the way, that's
And
been
it
true
works
since
sometimes.
Thomas Mann pretty much came up
Absolutely.
with the public education system in America.
That was basically the idea behind the public. Dewey was explicit about this. He of the Dewey Decimal System, which, does any kid know how to use that anymore? I kind of doubt it. Yeah, but you're absolutely right that was explicitly the ideal behind it. Matter of fact, we have Supreme Court cases that back that ideal. That part of public school is to indoctrinate you into basically assimilate you into the American ideal.
Well, I will say this: I would be far happier with the 1870s to 1930s version of progressivism compared to the progressivism that we have today, which I think is utterly destructive. But it could be. It could be that Americans are kind of prone to this sort of weird utopianism. I mean, there have been many examples of it. Certainly, there was a heyday of it around the turn of the 19th to the 20th century.
There was a lot of end of the world stuff going on around that, though, too, as there is at the end of every century.
But look, you can go all the way back to Jamestown and the original settlers of Jamestown, who the historical records tell us decided that they had read in the New Testament, one of the epistles of Paul, that the early Christians in the church in Jerusalem, so I guess actually it goes back all the way to Acts, not Paul. It goes all the way back to the original Christian community in Jerusalem, where they owned all things in common. And everybody got anything they wanted from their neighbors. They shared everything. And there is no record of how that ultimately worked in the church at Jerusalem, but there is a record of how it worked in Jamestown, because they read that and they said, that's exactly how we should build our settlement in Jamestown. And so the original colony in Jamestown, Virginia, wasn't the original colony. The original colony was off of...
The original colony of Europeans.
Yeah, no, the original colony of Europeans were in the Outer Banks in North Carolina, but
Roanoke,
they disappeared. The Roanoke colony disappeared.
I remember when my wife and I tried to go find that, and there were signs, but we couldn't find it.
Yeah, but Jamestown, they decided, okay, that's what we're going to have to do. They had a proto-communist commune built in Jamestown. And after they nearly all starved the first winter, they decided, hey, how about this?
The same thing happened up in Massachusetts.
Yeah, why don't we try to have private property instead and just have everybody own their stuff?
You maintain your field, you maintain your field.
Yeah, because it just, it didn't work. But there's been this stream of utopianism in America.
It was about this time
beginning.
that the tragedy of the commons was first wrote about, I think.
First written about. Yeah, it doesn't work. And it hasn't worked anywhere it's been tried since then, even with the full force and power of the modern police state. But it's always been there. It's always sort of hung around.
Look, Israeli kibbutzes are exactly this same thing. I brought them up earlier, so let's finish it off.
Yeah, they were explicitly socialist projects.
That's exactly what they are. And they're lovely in ideal. I think Bernie Sanders spent some time on one, didn't do a goddamn lick of work. He got kicked out. And that's the problem. It like literally crystallizes the problem. Kibbutzes would not exist in Israel if not for Israeli government funding. They obviously would not exist. They cannot produce enough to sustain themselves, so they have to be subsidized.
Well, I
But
think it's a little more complex than that. And it kind of makes me wonder why Jamestown didn't work. But I think if you have a small society that is culturally predisposed towards it, and who are also willing to be relatively ruthless in enforcing the rules of if a man does not work, neither should he eat,
right,
then I think maybe on a small scale you could work it out. I mean,
the Amish are still here with us. The Mennonites, they this is their operative belief, so they can do it.
yeah, by the way,
But the difference,
from text, my professor and the class couldn't understand why men of the Jamestown colony wouldn't spend their days goofing off instead of working. I was the only person in the class who had a real job.
well, that's what Bernie Sanders did when he went to the
But look, all of this is all interesting and it's all historical and it's all cultural, but we're talking around the issue. Where do we go from here? That seems to me to be the thing that is the most frightening to me. Because if people don't feel that they're getting what they want from government, they will provide it for themselves, either through individual action and ultimately, community action, and just tell the government to go screw, in which case you basically have an insurrection on your hands. Or they are going to create a government that will do what they want to do. And it will probably be done in a much more brutal way. The simplest thing would be to have a government that recognizes what needs to be done and that addresses these problems. Look, if there are people here in the country, immigrants who support terrorism, deported. If you come into the country illegally, deported. If you commit a crime, then you go to prison. This whole Soros prosecutor thing, where people who commit serious felonies, like those kids that ran over that retired police chief. I mean, they just murdered him. And they were being taken into the police station, and one of those kids was telling the cop, "I'll be out in 30 days. Bet me." As it turns out that...
And was he wrong?
In this case, as it turns out, yes, because they've decided to prosecute them as adults. So they're probably going to be in prison for 100 years. However, he wasn't wrong. He happened to be wrong in this specific case, but the experience of the criminal justice system for most recidivist offenders is that I am going to get a slap on the hand. I'm going to get sent home, especially for juvenile offenders, obviously, because we treat them differently. They have their own justice system. And why wouldn't you expect that that is how it was going to be handled? It would be best if the government were to begin to bend to the will of the people and begin to pursue much more rational policies, because that will be the most peaceful and the calmest way of implementing that. But if you...
These kids, I don't get though. Like, what is it? I mean, obviously we identified one pretty obvious invitation is the lack of prosecution. Well, why are these kids so heartless, so unconstrained by the famous Rousseauian social contract that they feel no compunction against, hurting people badly?
Because
hurting them very badly.
Or killing them, as they did in this case.
Yeah.
Again, I go back to what I've said so many times. Every generation of children is a vertical invasion of barbarians. We don't have a family structure in this country anymore. We've rather successfully severed that link to social cohesion. In fact, I believe now We're at a majority of, and different communities in the country have gone down this path at different rates. But at this point, the last holdouts in unwed motherhood were the white community.
Asians?
And we, well, no, the
No,
Asians.
Asians.
No, the Asians are the last holdouts. Whites have already crossed the 50% threshold for births out of wedlock. The Hispanic community crossed that threshold sometime in, I believe, the 1980s or 1990s. The black community crossed that threshold sometimes in the 70s. So the Asian community is largely the last holdout for the traditional family.
And what
United
drives me
States.
crazy about that is that in the 1950s, if you were black, you were more likely to be born into a household with two parents than if you were white.
That is, I don't think it was the 50s. I think it was the 40s. But yes, that was largely true.
40s, late 40s, early 50s, something like that. Yeah.
And certainly was true prior to the 1940s. That
was the norm. And we destroyed that. The Great Society absolutely destroyed that.
Yeah, we prioritized helping people who were not from intact families. And we incentivized not having intact families for the black community.
I tell this story all the time. My mother was told to divorce my dad because we had to go on welfare for a little bit because my dad was in college and my mom only had so many working opportunities. I was a kid. They couldn't use me for much. And so she went to go get a welfare check and they're like, well, you should divorce your husband and then you can get 20% more or whatever it was. And she was like, well, I'm not doing that. But it's a little weird that you're encouraging me to divorce my husband. What how is that promoting anything other than divorce and broken families?
Yeah, it doesn't. But what it does is it pays you if you divorce. It incentivizes.
What did Patrick Moynihan say when he did the definitive case on this? He did the definitive study on this. And his conclusion was, if you want more of something, pay for it.
And that's exactly what we did. And that has now basically gone through the black community, the Hispanic community, and the white community. And hopefully we'll get the Asians to buy into it soon. But the problem is,
I don't think the Asians will. I think the Asians are a little bit more on solid ground because they came here a lot later, for the most part. They didn't come over until the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, well, we will see. Because
I'm hoping the Asians can hold up their end of the bargain. It's goddamn. We need.
But that's not enough to save society. I mean, for better or for worse, we're still a white majority society, and once you have lost
we can't
the majority,
3% of
you can't depend on 3% of the population to save you. It's just not going to happen. If you can't get the 45 to 50%, then you've lost it, and we have largely lost it. And what we have raised now, increasingly, are generations of kids who have not received any family guidance, and boys especially. Need a firmer hand. They need a father figure. And as much as they might love their mothers generally are not the source of filial authority in the family structure. And we can talk about... They're
not the ones who teach you how to hold firm. Not that mothers can't be strict and capable. They obviously can. But a boy needs more than that. A boy needs more than boundaries. He needs an actual model, something to follow.
And if you can't find that model...
They're going to follow anything.
And if you can't find that model in your home, you will find it in somewhere else, perhaps in popular culture, wherever it may be. And so, this is part of the breakdown of society as well. And by the way, this is why I think so many men are now attracted to this progressive ideology. It provides a framework that lets them know where their place is, lets them know what their boundaries are, and it doesn't impose upon them the awful, awful burden of individual responsibility.
So they hope.
Yeah, so they hope. Um, and I don't know how we pull back from this. What I do know is that there are two ways it can happen. We can try to have a government that will impose saner policies and slowly reverse this course, which I think against the culture is going to be very hard to do because it's going to require a cultural change. Or we are going to have literal violence because people are going to say enough is enough, and people will begin to act to provide their own security and to do whatever it is that they think is necessary for their survival. And
You're
that takes
right,
us down a very dark road. And the thing that really bothers me about our government is that we seem intent on, and look, it doesn't even matter what topic you talk about. Our government seems haplessly incapable of addressing it. 2024 spending, Social Security, Medicaid, and interest on the national debt alone are 45% or 47% of the budget. Add the additional 14% for Medicaid and Obamacare. That's another 14%. So now we're at 57, 63. Now we're at 63%. Now we're at 2/3 of all federal spending is going to those programs: Social Security,
well, I think
health,
it's
and
relatively rule of thumb that about 70% of the federal budget is untouchable because most of it's mandatory, and the rest of that 70% is basically mandatory. It's not mandated by law, but you're going to have to spend it. And so all these government shutdowns and all that nonsense, it's over 30% of the budget.
Yeah,
and the discretionary part.
And by the way, we haven't had a budget since.
No, we haven't had a budget since 1996.
No, that's not true. We had budgets during the Clinton administration. We haven't had a budget since September 11th, 2001.
We had one budget in 1996 after the Contract with America. And I think it was 1996. Maybe it was a little bit later. We did not have a budget throughout the Bush years, did not have a budget through any of the Obama years, no budget through the Trump years. We certainly haven't had a budget. We have not signed an actual Congressional Budget Act budget, I don't think, since the late 90s.
Yeah, and by the way,
I don't know what year.
And by the way, they're required by law to produce a budget every year.
That's what the Congressional Budget Act says.
And they don't, and they haven't.
This is literally what Matt Gaetz was on about, and far too many people. Look, I understand that Matt Gaetz is not the most. He's not the most sympathetic character, and he's not the most sympathetic vehicle for this message. But his message was absolutely spot on. We put these rules in place, Kevin McCarthy, because we did not want you backing down from doing basic things. And the one thing that Matt Gaetz made very clear, even though it was muddled by the media, was that when you pushed back in I guess it was January, February, when they were trying to come up with a budget, and the Gaetz and his followers were like, okay, well, here are the 12 appropriations bills that we're supposed to put forward for, according to the Congressional Budget Act. When that was rejected and pushed off, and pushed off, and pushed off, and pushed off, he made it clear, look, when we elected you, we gave you rules, and we told you what we're going to do if you don't follow through. McCarthy didn't follow through. They enacted their plan. I do not blame them for that one bit. Oh, we're governments in disarray. Oh my God, horror, horror. What? They're not passing laws? Great. fucking take them offline for as long as fucking
Okay, well, I will
possible,
tell you,
as far as I'm concerned.
I'll tell you, I had a slightly different perspective about that, and my perspective was tactical, not strategic. I fully recognize that. I just thought that it was an insane risk when you have a 5-vote majority to vacate the speaker's chair. And the fact that we had to go through...
I'm not going to disagree with that.
And the fact that we somehow managed to go through Steve Scalise, Jim Jordan, and finally ended up with Johnson as the speaker. While I think a lot of people would say that was a good thing, it's a good thing we ended up here, it could very well have gone completely differently. And it did not seem to me that Matt Gaetz actually had a plan beyond getting rid of Kevin McCarthy.
There was an absolute risk, and I think Matt Gaetz pushed that. Could it have turned out? Absolutely.
It could have turned out much worse. All it would have taken was for a bunch of Republicans to say, we get to keep the majority, but we will make Hakeem Jeffries the speaker. And it would have only taken 5, by the way. Only taken 5 for that to happen. So I thought from a tactical point of view, it was an insanely reckless move. And the fact that it turned out...
I kind of like... See, for me, that's... there's an old chess term, putting the question to the bishop. To me, that's a bold move. You put the question to the bishop, and in chess, that means essentially, I'm making a bold move. Now you have to make a choice. Do you want to take out this particular piece and then hope that you survive? Or do you recognize that there's a serious onslaught coming? That's how that played out to me.
Yeah,
just my opinion. That's just how I.
Chad is saying it would be one thing if Gaetz had lined up votes beforehand, but he just went for it and hoped for the best. And that was my problem with the Gaetz thing. We're just going to get rid of McCarthy and we'll just see where the chips fall. That I just thought was extraordinarily reckless. And I think we can count ourselves lucky that we didn't get a much worse speaker than Congressman Johnson.
That's exactly what I would do if I was in Congress, which is why you should never elect me to anything. Matter of fact, don't ever elect me to anything. I will be a fucking tyrant. I promise you. I will be a tyrant. You will do what I say, and that's all I'm going to accept.
Yeah,
don't elect me to anything ever.
Congressmen don't have that power, fortunately. But, yeah, we skipped past it. But, okay, fine. We've already seen how we can't even create a budget, which is one of their basic, perhaps the basic responsibility like constitutionally.
I mean, we go back to the English Civil War. This is your basic fucking function. That's what you fought the English Civil War over, was for the Parliament to have control over the exchequer. That's literally what you fought over. No more, the executive branch getting to write their own free checks.
Yeah, you killed a king to enforce that.
Right.
And even had a short-lived republic afterwards.
Yeah, republic.
But move beyond that. We can look at the way the government handled COVID. Look at the way the government is handling Israel right now, where Tony Blinken is over in Israel saying, "Hey, why don't we have a ceasefire?" Well, look, you son of a bitch, we had a ceasefire on October 7th.
That's exactly right.
Who broke it?
Yeah.
Who put us in this position?
Yeah, we already did that, Tony.
And we've already talked about immigration. We can't even secure the borders. I mean, up until this last week,
we refused to.
Up until this last week, when Texas won in district court, to prevent the CBP from cutting the barbed wire that the state of Texas had put up to keep people from coming across the border, which they were literally doing.
What did the CBP do? They went and started moving the wire.
Yeah, just take forklifts out there and lift it.
How can you say you're for protecting the border when you're doing that? You can't.
Or talk about voting. Voter ID, things like that. Nope, can't have that.
I've been saying this for literally, I don't know, probably a dozen years, maybe a little bit more. The whole point to this endless uh, trampsing people into the country is for Democrats to get more voters. That's what they see as the advantage. That's why they support it. That's why they push for it. And I've been blocked and whatever by so many liberals because I pointed this out. Oh, that's just ridiculous. You're just a xenophobe. You're just a whatever phobe. I'm like, why else would they want to do this? They're flooding the country with people who have no interest in our actual government. All they want are goodies. And we're perfectly happy to hand out the fucking goodies. And so they'll vote for more goodies. It's really fucking simple. There's a whole history on this. We actually can look and see how this fucking works.
Yes, and none of it matters because the government is not going to do what the American people want it to do. And so
Which
populism
is why evolution and insurgency, insurrection is on the mind. Our government is rogue. I mean, I hate to say it, but that's just the truth.
And by the way,
looks out for itself.
If you think Jan 6 was an insurrection in a country,
just wait.
In a country with 100 million people owning 400 million guns, if you think January 6th was an insurrection, I've got really bad news for you. Because a government that doesn't do what its people want and that basically will look, anybody for at least a year and a half until finally Ralph Barrick cracked it in his open letter with other co-authors to Science. Anybody from 2020 through 2021 for a period of nearly 18 months who even mentioned, hey, maybe coronavirus came from Wuhan, got the full force of the U.S. government coming down on them as spreading misinformation. Because Peter Daszak and the Eco Health Alliance had already preemptively decided through a letter that they'd written to, I believe, Science in that case, that we couldn't question the idea of the natural origin of COVID. And you could get tossed off of me. And we can see it. We see it in the Twitter files. People who are talking about the lab leak theory that COVID leaked from the lab in Wuhan. The federal government is saying, hey, these people I think are spreading disinformation. That may be a violation of your terms of service. You should probably silence or ban them on social media. The federal government was doing that. When, as we now know, it was indeed an open question throughout all of that time about whether it was in fact a lab leak, and government officials, including Tony Fauci, knew that it was, that the scientific opinion was there was a high likelihood that it did come from a lab leak.
And he knew it because he was the one that funded it.
Ah, yes. Well, we didn't even dive down that rabbit hole and funding gain of function research, which he lied to Congress about.
Oh, what are they really thinking? Yeah. No, he knew.
And he lied to Congress about it, by the way, saying America doesn't fund gain of function research whenever he was funneling money to Peter Daszak, who was in fact doing gain of function research and was doing it in Wuhan. Look at any of those Rand Paul
and Fauci jousts in Congress, and Rand Paul has him dead to rights because Fauci can't talk over him. Rand Paul knows the lingo as well as Fauci does. So Paul's just not, he's not backing down. He's never backed down. And I applaud him for that. One of the reasons I've always liked him. He doesn't back down at all. He's got enough of his dad in him that he understands the purpose of government and wants to see it actually enacted to its purpose.
And he's a good enough doctor to know when another doctor is feeding him bullshit.
And he's an actual doctor who knows. No, I know what those terms mean. You're not going to fool me with this runaround. And he put it to him. And he put it to him several times. And every day, a little bit more comes out that shows that not only was Paul completely right, but Fauci was completely lying. He is a lying, panderist, opportunist. He made millions of fucking dollars off of all that bullshit.
And Fauci, by the way, should be prosecuted for lying to Congress. I mean, there's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Of course he should. He never will be.
No. Well, that's
but yes, he should.
And that brings up another thing that we can't trust the government to do. To basically, certainly at the federal level, we can't trust the government to run a Department of Justice.
They can't hold politicians accountable.
Yeah. And well,
I mean Democratic politicians.
Although they are going after Senator Menendez from New Jersey. So,
but they don't like him.
They're doing something.
And frankly, he's really dirty.
Yeah, well, he's a sleazebag, so sure. But you can't trust the impartial enforcement of the law from the federal government. I just don't know how long we can go this way. Now, it just may be that there aren't enough Americans left who are willing to step up. There is a body of opinion that said one of the prime things about January 6th and calling it an insurrection and going after people, throwing them in jail, putting them in solitary confinement for months simply to convict them of unlawful parading and let them go. The whole thing was a big exercise in what the French Revolution used to call pour encourager les autres, for the encouragement of others. The whole purpose of it was to tell people who might be inclined to protest actively against the government that it is a dangerous thing to do, and we will come after you with the full force of the federal law enforcement community if you step out of line. And so it just may be that people are just going to keep their heads down and try to feed their families and just watch the entire country go to shit. That is certainly one thing that may happen. The other thing that may happen, which I think is equally frightening, is that people will say no. And they're going to start running around in the hills with a rifle, raising an army. And at that point, all bets are off.
Depending on the number that do it, yes.
One of our commenters says parts of the country could become Northern Ireland. And
become Northern what?
Ireland.
Yeah, I don't like that, being an Irishman myself.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that's probably pessimistic enough of a point to end the podcast on, Michael. So have a great week. We'll talk to you next week if we're all still here.
Let's hope.
All right, you have been listening to the Observations Podcast for Sunday, the 5th of November, 2023. Have a great week. We'll look forward to speaking to you again next week. Until then, so long.